In 2019, a single company was valued at $47 billion. Not a tech company, not a pharmaceutical giant, not an energy corporation, an office rental business, a company that took long-term leases on buildings and rented desks to startups. That was it. And somehow, the smartest investors on earth, people who had built and destroyed fortunes across decades, looked at this business and said, $47 billion. 4 years later, it was bankrupt. Today, we are going inside the most spectacular business collapse of the modern era. This is the story of WeWork, of one man's ego, and of the most expensive lie ever told in business. To understand WeWork, you first have to understand Adam Neumann. Because WeWork was never really a real estate company. It was a personality, a vision, a feeling. And that feeling had a face. Adam Neumann was born in Israel in 1979. He spent his childhood constantly moving, 13 schools in 13 years. Unstable, restless, always the outsider trying to become the center of the room. He arrived in New York in his late 20s with very little money, a string of failed businesses behind him, and an almost supernatural ability to make people believe in him. He was tall, loud, magnetic. When Adam Neumann walked into a room, the room changed. He did not pitch investors. He recruited them into a movement. WeWork was not just office space. He would tell anyone who would listen. It was energy, community, a new way of working, a revolution in how human beings connect. He once stood in front of a room full of serious, experienced business people. People who had seen every kind of founder, every kind of pitch, and told them, with complete conviction, that WeWork's mission was to elevate the world's consciousness. And they nodded. They wrote the checks. That single fact tells you everything you need to know about what was coming. Here is what WeWork actually did. Underneath all the philosophy and the vision and the consciousness elevating, they found large office buildings in expensive cities. They signed long-term leases on them, sometimes 15, sometimes 20 years, binding contracts that obligated them to pay rent for decades regardless of what happened next. Then they renovated those offices. Exposed brick, warm lighting, craft beer on tap, ping-pong tables, the kind of space that made a 24-year-old startup founder feel like they had already made it. Then they rented individual desks and small private offices to those founders on short, flexible, month-to-month contracts. Now, if you have ever run a business or studied even the basics of finance, you already see the problem. WeWork owed fixed, long-term, non-negotiable payments going out and collected flexible, short-term, easily canceled payments coming in. The moment a recession hit, the moment startups started cutting costs and canceling memberships, WeWork would still owe every single landlord every single month. The income could disappear overnight. The obligations could not. Every serious analyst who looked at this model said the same thing. WeWork's answer was always the same too. We are not a real estate company, they said. We are a technology company. And that one sentence was worth tens of billions of dollars. In 2016, a man named Masayoshi Son flew to New York. Son was the founder of SoftBank, one of the largest technology investment funds in the world. A man who had once, briefly, been the richest person on earth. A man with a reputation for making billion-dollar bets on instinct. He took a 12-minute tour of a WeWork office. 12 minutes. Then he sat down with Adam Neumann and committed $4 billion. Not after months of analysis. Not after reviewing audited financials. Not after asking the hard questions about what would happen when the economy turned. 12 minutes. Son would later say, and he actually said this publicly, that he preferred to invest based on gut feeling and animal instinct rather than numbers and spreadsheets. Over the next 3 years, SoftBank poured nearly $10 billion into WeWork. And that money did something very specific. It let WeWork grow so fast that the growth itself became the story. New city after new city. New building after new building. New members, new revenue. Always expanding, always moving, always too fast for anyone to stop and ask, wait, is this actually working? But more importantly, and this is the part that ensnared everyone else, it set a valuation. Because when SoftBank invests $10 billion and says your company is worth $47 billion, every other investor in the world assumes SoftBank did the homework. They assumed wrong. By 2019, WeWork was preparing to go public. And for the first time, The full numbers had to be shown to the world. Revenue, $1.8 billion. Losses, $1.9 billion. Losses that were accelerating, not shrinking, every single year. WeWork was burning through cash at a rate that would make it insolvent within months without a constant supply of fresh investment. And yet, $47 billion valuation. How do you square that circle? You invent a new way of measuring reality. WeWork's finance team created a metric they called community-adjusted EBITDA. It was a profitability measure that excluded rent, marketing, administrative costs, growth expenses. In other words, it excluded the costs of running the business. Strip all of that out, and WeWork looked profitable. It was not a lie, technically. Every number was real. But it was the financial equivalent of saying you are healthy after removing your symptoms from the medical report. In August 2019, WeWork filed its S-1, the document required before any company can list on the stock market. It was the moment the curtain finally came down. Investors and analysts read what was in that document, and what they found stopped them cold. The CEO had personally borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars from his own company. He had bought buildings, and then charged WeWork rent to use them. Rent paid to himself. He had trademarked the word we, and then sold that trademark back to WeWork for $6 million. He had restructured the company's voting shares so that his own votes counted 20 times more than those of ordinary shareholders, meaning even if you owned the company, he controlled it. Wall Street's reaction was swift and brutal. The IPO was pulled. The valuation collapsed from $47 billion to under $10 billion in a matter of weeks. And Adam Neumann was removed as CEO. He left with a severance package of approximately $1.7 billion. The man who had driven the company into the ground left a billionaire. Here is where this story becomes about something more than one man's ego. When WeWork finally filed for bankruptcy in 2023, approximately 12,400 people lost their jobs. Not Neumann, not the SoftBank executives, not the board members who had nodded along for years. The community managers, the cleaners, the receptionists, the young people who had taken jobs at WeWork because it felt electric, because they believed in what it was building. Many of them had accepted lower salaries in exchange for stock options that were now worth nothing. Zero. Meanwhile, Adam Neumann had already walked away with nearly $2 billion. SoftBank had lost billions, but SoftBank had other billions. Other funds, other bets. The people with the least to lose going in lost everything they had put in. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is exactly the pattern from our last video on inflation. When financial systems fail, the damage always flows downhill. Always. So what does WeWork actually teach us? For things, and they are worth writing down. 1. Valuation is not value. A company being valued at $47 billion does not mean it is worth $47 billion. It means someone was willing to pay that. Those are very different things. Always ask what a company actually earns, not what it claims it will earn someday. 2. Charisma is not a business model. Adam Neumann was one of the most compelling founders of his generation. He was also running a structurally broken business. Great stories can delay a reckoning. They cannot prevent one. 3. Always follow the incentives. When a CEO can borrow from his own company, charge his own company rent, and override every other shareholder's vote, he is not building something. He is extracting something. The structure of the incentives tells you everything about what will happen next. 4. The loudest claims of disruption often hide the most ordinary business of all. WeWork disrupted nothing. It rented desks. At a loss. For a decade. The disruption was in the language, not the business. The next time you hear about a company valued in the tens of billions, the next time a founder talks about elevating consciousness and changing how humans connect, ask one question. What does it actually earn? Not what it will earn. Not what it could earn. Not what it would earn if you removed all the costs. What does it earn? Right now? Today? Because $47 billion was never real. It was a story. A very expensive, very convincing story. And the people who paid the most for believing it were the ones who could afford it least. Subscribe to Market Dissected. Because next week, we are answering the question that comes right after everything we have covered in these first two videos. What actually happens to your money during a recession? Not the theory, not the textbook answer. The reality. Step by step. I will see you Thursday. Market Dissected.